I'd like to turn it over to Dick Thomas, past chairman of our commission, and he has many other historic accolades, but if he wants to elaborate on those, I'll let him do that. Thanks.
Turn this on. There we go. All right. A little handout for everybody here. You want to take some of these and pass them back. Mount Vernon history is always fun. We are, as all of America, a part of larger pictures and larger trends in the way our country developed. And in many ways, there's not much new here. The settlement patterns that were established in Mount Vernon were repeated again and again in the westward movement. The early settlers who came here came from the states of the old Northwest, that is Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania, particularly, and a few Southerners snuck in from what was then Virginia and would now be West Virginia, and even a couple from the Carolinas. These were third and fourth generation Americans who knew how to farm, they knew how to build communities, and they were in search of fresh opportunities, meaning new soil and especially new rich soil. So we have settlers coming into the area initially who are well oriented in construction. They know how to farm, they know good land, and they're going to move into this eastern area of Iowa along the many watersheds of the Mississippi. When you stop and think about it, we know there's a river running into the Mississippi about every 15 or 20 miles, all the way along the eastern strip of the state. Right here, of course, to our south is the Cedar. To our north is the Wapsipinicon. You go down further south, and we have the Iowa River. And going north, you go all the way up to the Turkey and the Iowa further north. But all of these river streams provided highways for settlers coming into the area. They could come up the Mississippi River to Muscatine, which was Bloomington or Bloomfield at the time. It changed its name, and then across a short wagon road to the Cedar River, and then follow the Cedar River on up to our area. Most people in Mount Vernon don't think about it, but the closest town to the Mississippi River from Mount Vernon is Muscatine. The river takes the big east-west bend, comes way back in. On the east-west run there, and that's the closest place to the Mississippi. Most of us think about it as being Clinton, because when we're going east, we always go across the river at Clinton. Well, early settlers, experienced people who come into the area. The Indians are technically removed after a war in 1832, and by 1836 to 1840, we're going to find people here ready for land sales, to buy the land that has been surveyed, and to start settlement patterns, or start settlement. This is an old pattern, it's going to repeat itself. Now, what's unique about Mount Vernon? Well, I have enjoyed the search for many years. What's unique about Mount Vernon? And it turns out there's a lot of things. But to begin with, it's the hill. And I did draw a little slope of a hill over here. I know you don't recognize that, but now that I tell you that it's a hill, you may believe me. The only reason for Mount Vernon to be here as a town is because of the hill and a couple Army engineers who were hired to lay out a road from Iowa City to Dubuque. The new capital was to be in Iowa City, and they wanted a quick way to move troops down to the capital to protect it from Indians who were still to the west. So we have the military road, a federally sponsored road, paid for by Congress, laid out by the engineers, and then to mark it, a gentleman from was hired take an ox or a team of oxen and a plow, and to plow a furrow that would follow the engineer's route, and that is Highway 1. Now, why an engineer went over a hill is beyond me. It would seem that with all this beautiful land here, that standing on one hill looking to another with your compass trying to get to Iowa City, that there ought to be ways to minimize the number of hills. But for whatever reason, the engineers decided to go over the hill here in Mount, which becomes Mount Vernon. And it's a real pull. It's a real grade here. Coming from the north, it's a long, slow, flat, and then we get a very rapid acceleration on the north side. On the south side, again, a nice drop-off, and then on again. But either way, this is a real pull for an animal pulling a stagecoach, a wagon, or anything else. Now, the reason that the town is here is because of the hill. What happens here is when you have come up this grade, you have worked your animal very hard, or if you come up this grade. So what happens here with the town is right at the crossroads, it's a great place for a watering trough, for a tavern. You're going to stop. You're going to stop. It's just one of those things that you know is going to happen. You've got to rest an animal coming either way. So the town starts in some sense as a little watering hole. And as farms dot the area, of course the first farms are going to be Abbey, up in the creek in this area, around the creek, and another settler by the name of Daniel Seward Hahn over near where the quarries on the south east part of the town. The farmers are going to start to take this land. And as they do, we have merchants coming and building on all four corners of the intersection. Now, I recently looked at some early maps, and it isn't long after this highway is put in place, and this is a north-south highway now, and that's where the settlers are going to use this as a funnel to bring traffic down to Iowa City to the capital, the new capital city. But there's another trail that leaves Muscatine called the Old Bloomfield Road, and it goes up to Tipton. Now, Tipton's another town that doesn't have a reason for being, other than the fact that it was in the middle of the county and somebody said, this is the middle of the county and my farm is here and let's have the county seat here. That's about as, nice flat county, very little to except the river on one edge of it. Well, the next county seat is going to be Marion. And so what happens here is they start connecting county seats by wagon road. So we go from Muscatine to Tipton, the Old Bloomfield Road. Then we go from Tipton to Marion. And the Tipton to Marion Trail is established. And then we're going to go on to Belle Plaine. But the courthouses need to be connected. And so the first highways in the area are going to be essentially state highways are going to be between county seat towns. So here's Mount Vernon on the federally financed and the major artery in Iowa, Highway 1, and it's at the crossing here of the Tipton to Marion Trail. Now this portion of the trail from, at least from Mount Vernon and probably the other side of Lisbon, but at least as far as I can tell, the original trail from Mount Vernon to Marion, that particular portion of the trail was later incorporated into what we call the Lincoln Highway. In other words, Mount Vernon Road is the oldest road across the county. And Mount Vernon sits on this crossroads, this junction of two very early major trails. So it becomes, again, its purpose here is a little service community serving travelers. It means it's going to attract blacksmiths, wheelwrights, leather workers, people who are involved in supporting early horse or animal travel. It'll be a stop on a stagecoach. First buildings are going to be called taverns. And in some sense, that's not a saloon, that's not a bar of today. It's a trading post in the sense where there's a little bit of everything. You can buy something for your journey, but you can get food there. and in some cases you can stay overnight. So Mount Vernon, reason for Mount Vernon, what's unique about it, it's right here. It's the accidents of trails and of important major transportation routes. Now, and this is the theme of our development, the next major transportation revolution will be, of course, steam and the railroads. And we don't know why. The Chicago to Council Bluffs, I think, was the original name of the railroad. Alan, can you help me out with that? The original line is going to run from Chicago to from Clinton to Council Bluffs. And it won't be until after the Civil War that there's a bridge across the Mississippi. So it's an intrastate railroad. But why they laid it out this way, who knows? But here's Mount Vernon, and they lay out a railroad that's going to go on out here to across the state. Now, some of you may know, but Cedar Rapids was not on the railroad. It bypassed Cedar Rapids. Now, you don't bypass towns and have them live. In fact, if you didn't get a town, the chances of a railroad, the chances of a town surviving were very small. So what Cedar Rapids does is it builds its own little railroad, which is a simple horseshoe. A train goes past the city, backs up into Green Square, right near where the library and art center is now, and then back onto the line and on one way or the other. It's this big U-shaped track that goes in and out in order to connect Cedar Rapids with the main line of the railroad. On the other side of that, Mount Vernon, simply the depot sat out here on the trail. Well, I'm not doing well. Okay. Forget the depot. I just moved it. would that we had it and we could. But in any case, again, we're on a railroad. This opens up now the east and the west. We start importing all kinds of goods manufactured in Chicago. The great network of Chicago in its service and its tentacles out into the hinterland of the Midwest are well fixed by 1892 in the Great Chicago World's Fair. We are already drawn into the Chicago magnet, being served by the new mail order houses of Sears and Roebuck and Montgomery Ward. We're getting John Deere International Harvester equipment being sold in Cedar Rapids. It's all coming out on the railroads and the movement west. So Mount Vernon, again, is on a major transportation route here that is of national significance. That's just simply regional, but of national significance in the building of the railroad. Now, and the next revolution will be that of the automobile. And again, I've already alluded to this. What the founders of the Lincoln Highway did, a group of promoters, sponsored primarily by tire makers, the Firestones, and a few others. Packard got into the car people, started promoting good roads. And they convinced the governors that they had found a way to drive across the United States in an automobile. And they said, let's have a national route that everybody can drive across the United States in an automobile. This is pretty early, by around 1910. There aren't too many cars out there. And what they do are simply use the existing roads. They take maps and they say, oh, here's a trail. If we take this one, we can go here. Then we take the next one, and they just connected these across the United States and called it the Lincoln Highway. And the Tipton to Marion Trail is part of that. There'll be a little development from Clarence on towards Clinton that will be it's another old wagon trail connecting county seat towns. So the Lincoln Highway is going to bring millions of travelers through Mount Vernon. Is another accident. Nobody in Mount Vernon went out lobbying to be on the Lincoln Highway. A lot of towns did. Mount Vernon didn't go out and beg a railroad to come. Most towns did. And Mount Vernon's earliest existence clearly was at the behest of a group of several engineers and the federal government with Highway 1. So we have been on, in some sense, accidentally at the forefront of all the major transportation revolutions. And the town begins to reflect that in architecturally, economically, and even social. And of course, into this mix, we drop in 1853 Cornell College. It's here before the railroad. There's a lot of interesting things about Cornell I could mention to you, but one of them that I think is terribly significant, and that is since 1853, when the college opened its doors, it has never failed to graduate a class. It has been in continuous operation. That is not true of the University of Iowa, which takes a much earlier founding date. It's not true of Coe College, which closed for 35 years. It's not true of Iowa Wesleyan. It's not true of Upper Iowa. These early colleges had very real financial problems and often closed for a period of time. Not Cornell. But the day it's open, it's always graduated a class. In the Civil War, it was pretty thin, but they made it, thanks to the fact that they were established as a coeducational institution. And almost all the classes after 1862 to 1865 were women. But the college stayed afloat. And this interrelationship between the college as it grows and the town is part of why we have so many National Register districts, and particularly the National Register district called the Cornell Mount Vernon district. It shows the interplay of a small college and its history with the interplay and interrelationship with a small community and its growth. So 1853, when the railroad comes through in 1858, the college is already here, and it's going to start using the railroad to bring students. And it's going to also bring benefactors. We start seeing Chicago persons on the Cornell Board of Trustees. They can come out on the railroad. And we start seeing students coming from Chicago and the suburbs, and they still do. And within a few years, after the Civil War, we're going to have north-south lines. And the college will begin to recruit and bring in students from Minneapolis and St. Louis. Very easy to get it on the north-south line. So the existence of the college and its growth, in part, are related to the same elements of transportation revolution. Well, I've sort of run this through the Lincoln Highway era. Probably officially ends with the bypass in about 1956. I meant to look this up, but it's right in that period when the bypass goes through town. Highway 30 is officially a U.S. highway. It takes the Lincoln Highway and calls it U.S. 30. But with the bypass, we have a whole new era. And I guess I would argue as a historian that transition from Mount Vernon as this beautiful little out-county town, and the transition from that into the urban magnet of Cedar Rapids occurs during World War II. It's been occurring slowly, and you can see it in the newspapers. All the Cedar Rapids merchants used to advertise in the Mount Vernon paper. Killian, Armstrong, that ran ads in the Mount Vernon newspaper. After World War II, people are taking the Cedar Rapids Gazette. It's not worth it to advertise, those big stores to advertise in a small town newspaper. And the town became a kind of bedroom community during World War II. Tremendous need for labor and housing in the manufacturing sectors in Cedar Rapids. People lived out here. They could all get gas or did carpooling because of gas rationing, whatever. Mount Vernon really starts to lose its economic independence during World War II. Well, the National Register in our discussions today deal with structures in areas that are over 50 years of age. So any of you who are over 50 can go on the National Register if you're of local significance. So we've got Alan Duval up for national significance, I think. Now, what you have on your sheet, I want to go through with you and with some visually now, put some context into what we're talking about and talk about, in some sense, architectural style. And right off the top, we have a problem. What is a style? And what people have generally, for years, even architectural historians, worried about, well, is it a Queen Anne or is it not? And in the last 30 years, historians have begun rather not to look so much at styles, which seem to project the notion that there is a pure style. And now what we're doing is we're looking at details or elements. And when we say we have enough of these elements, then we begin to say that has the marks of a Queen Anne style or a Foursquare style or whatever. So we've given up the notion of sort of pure styles and trying to make buildings fit into the style. What we're trying to do is describe the building and then see if there's enough in that description to hang a style name on it. So that's really where I'm going with you today. Then there's this issue of the vernacular. Vernacular means, in some sense, folk of the people. And I think every house in town is vernacular because everybody puts their own stamp on a house. Even if it's a pattern book house, you make choices about what kind of decoration you're going to put on it. You're going to turn it, modify it just a little bit, even from the plans that you may have gotten from a magazine or that your builder may have brought to you from his stack of plans. But every home, every residence, as well as commercial buildings, in a way, sooner or later become vernacular. So one of my friends always says, oh, you live in Iowa, that's the vernacular state, because the whole state's this way. Well, I mean, that shows you in some sense the absurdity of trying to impose labels onto things. What we need to look at are the characteristics of the building itself, and then try to give it a name that is close to representing those characteristics. The other thing here is builders versus architects. A builder is essentially a contractor who knows how to put a structure together and has the skills to do that. Architects are those who are involved with design, drawing it all out, laying it out. For a town like Mount Vernon, there are very few architects who design homes. There are a couple, and I'm finding more of them, and so I'm a little more cautious about this. But Alan Duvall's house, the stone house on facing Ash Park, is an architect-designed home. The Prawl House up next to the campus, old Doc Prowl's home, architect-designed home, got the drawing. And that fits the period of the 1920s and early, the 1920s particularly, when people were commissioning or looking for architects to help them design a different type of house than has been there before. We also have Dave Lyon's house over next to the Petro, just up the hill on the left-hand side. Dave Lyon's place is a Brown Healy. J.W. Brown did that house as well as a number of others in town. But essentially these homes that we are talking about that are over 50 years of age, particularly those that are already in the district, are essentially builders' homes. Somebody brought you a set of plans that they got from a book, which are called pattern books, or they'll bring you 2 or 3 millwork catalogs. You sat down with them and said, oh, well, look, you know, I really like this stuff. Let's use this in the woodwork in the front room, and we'll use this stuff in the woodwork in the kitchen. And you literally took all these pieces and put them together, and you did your own home with your builder. But the basic plans were laid out and available to the builder from commercial sources, and that's most of the structures we have here. So there's not going to be much original in the town in terms of what we think about original architect design homes in the periods that we're concerned about today. Now let's take a look at some of these so-called styles or periods. The military, along the board here, I want to explain this to you if you haven't been here before. This is the architectural history of our town woven into the kind of themes I'm talking about here. We start with the military road era, and it is essentially at the era of our early brick homes. And I'm going to talk about that. Then we created here a special little display of Cornell architecture through the years. The railroad bringing us all this wonderful woodwork from millworking places along the Mississippi River. We've got examples of those styles. Then our commercial district, the Lincoln Highway, the influence of the automobile and the later period, and then of course our Ash Park district. But let's start out very briefly here in this survey with the military road era or the classic era. We have the Greek Revival styles, and we have some Gothic, but very, very little Gothic Revival style. This is one of our early homes. It's in the right place. This is now been covered over by some obnoxious material. I'm on film, I know that. But this is a brick home, and like many of these others, are soft brick. That is, they're baked. The brick is made right here on the property. They're baked and put up by very talented stone masons and stone and brick masons. And we now know who some of those were. And we know a lot of the buildings that they did. But they're in here very early. This building is probably from about 1849, 48 or 49. We'll see others like it. It's a simple rectangular box with 3 openings on the second floor, 3 openings on the first floor. Everything is balanced. It's symmetrical. It's nothing, nothing more than just a big box. And it has very few. We'll come back to this in a minute. It has very few decorative elements on it, and you have to really look at them very hard to see them. Down at the bottom of this sheet, where I've got basic concepts, what I'm going to do is look at shapes, textures, lights, decoration, and color in each of these styles very quickly, because those are always involved in every style. So here we have a brick structure. There are a few wood ones here, but it's a very expandable style. You can have 3 openings this way on the short end, or we can go up the street. And again, one of our very early homes, 3 openings here on the wider, the width side of this of the structure. The only decorative elements on the outside are going to be sort of up here in the corners, under the pediments, and are the frieze, as it's called, right under the overhang of the roof. And then you'll find a few little decorative elements over the hoods of the windows. But that's, you know, here we have a very basic rectangular structure. Work on the end, work on the broad side, or in its most elaborate form, this is the Morrissey house. This is one of the finest examples we have of a residence in a Greek Revival style. This is elegant in this style. Notice they've accentuated the hoods over the windows, which are a raised brick. But look at the lovely entry here with the side lights. A real sense of elegance here. But now this one, we've seen 3. This is 5. This is 5 over 5. This is a big house. And you know what's going to happen here is there are going to be 2 windows. You can once you understand the style, you can determine from the outside what the inside structure of the house is rather quickly, especially in this style. You're going to come in, and to the left are going to be a large room with these 2 front windows, and there'll be another room on the other side, a double wall supporting wall on either side here, the stairway up the middle, a landing, large landing, bedrooms in the top. It's usually they're divided into about 4 quarters, 4 quadrants. College buildings, College Hall, for example, is the same structure. Let me just see if I can do this. Going to come in the door, the stairway up here to the second floor, but you have these 4 quadrants. And then oftentimes with this structure, you'll hang on a summer kitchen on the back, and a lot of those summer kitchens have been preserved because they've become now part of the house. But they're usually of wood, not always. There's some of them that are done in brick. Well, we could do a lot more with this. I just need to give you some idea. This is the earliest structures we have. These come to us because the people had built them in Indiana, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. This is the house that they left. Mount Vernon is a brick and mortar town. We have enormous, for a small Iowa town, enormous amount of brick structures. In our next historic district, we'll be trying to take all of our early brick homes and put them into one historic district. Here it is in wood. Essentially just a, again, 3/3 rectangular box, nicely painted here with the pediment. It can be done in wood. In Mount Vernon, mostly it's executed in brick. The brick here is double brick wall. I just want you to see this. They were tearing down an old farmhouse, and I got this picture. These are interior walls, but what you see here is, see how those two walls are tied together by the brick lying this way? If I can make my, right here. It's tying these two walls. About every 7 rows of brick that come up, there's one down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows here, 6 or 7. It's tying these two walls together. And it's an easy way to, in some sense, to tell how old these houses are. Your brick is either going to be a double brick wall like this, and it's wonderful because it has an airspace in it for insulation. But brick is either going to be a double brick wall, which is a structural as well as is a structural feature, or they're going to be just a brick curtain. That is, the house is going to be standing on its own. The brick is just simply a curtain on the outside. That's going to come later. But that's about all you could, those are 2 things you need to know about brick. Okay, we move on to the railroad era here quickly. I'm going to take more time than I planned. Oh, this is the Gothic. The only Gothic structure immediately in our area. A Gothic revival structure by a Chicago architect by the name of Cass Chapman. Comes out to do this in 1875. The cornerstone's laid in 1876. But it isn't finished until 1882. But it's a gorgeous stone Gothic building. The stone is out of the Mount Vernon Quarry, which is now the Nature Park. And this is a great monument, in some sense, to the community. It had its own quarry. Most of the early foundations that you have in your houses came out of the quarry. Clearly this building is the only building that's ever where the entire stone comes out of the quarry. We do see some Greek revival, Gothic revival influenced in a few other places, but in eastern Iowa there isn't very much Gothic revival. I've traveled the state looking for it. It's not a popular style, but it clearly is here. And the Gothic revival style, the Gothic always has pointed windows. You know, you see them here, but they're all along the chapel on the other side. Enormous number of pointed arch windows. Okay, here we go. The Queen Anne's. Here's Mr. Stein. The Victorian period, or in Mount Vernon, we are a tremendous number of these Queen Anne style. While this structure, the Greek revival structure, was rectangular, what happens in the Queen Anne, or the larger movement called Victorian stuff, is we have asymmetrical houses. You know, they're going to have all kinds of projections, porches on them, but the flow of the rooms on the inside is much different. This is very formal. You go from room to room. In the Victorian Queen Anne, there's a kind of flow between the rooms. The use of French doors, sliding doors, some sense in which you feel that you can move through the house. And that's going to be very apparent in the Queen Anne style and its asymmetry. Again, here we have now enormous amount of woodwork that's coming into the community from Clinton to decorate these homes, and both inside and out. Here you have the extensive use of fish scaling up in the gables. A lot of woodwork around the windows themselves, a delicate porch. Entries now not necessarily right in the center of the house. These are, we have an incredible stock of these. Let's just take a look at a couple here more. You're all familiar with all these, so I don't want to. All Queen Anne's, supposedly, all Queen Anne's have a tower. If you see a house with a tower, you can impress your friends and neighbors by saying, oh, there's a Queen Anne. It seems to be it's almost an essential element. We're going to see one without. But here you have a square tower on the right side of this building. Of course, that's the music practice house or the Plattner house. The use of all kinds of textures on the outside. Fish scale, and then a siding, sort of a lap siding, and then terracotta is scattered throughout this building. Its exterior decoration is essential to the whole notion of what's going on here. You not only decorate the inside of the house, now you're decorating the outside. Let's take a look at another one. This is, again, the college dormitory rood house, and believe it or not, when you walk past it next time, look right over in the corner over here, and behind that front porch here, you'll see there's a little tower, and it's pinched on the top. It's this sort of element, signature kind of element of this type of style. Big homes, flowing rooms, all kinds of textures on the exterior. And of course, here's one of the grandest ones, I think, in town, the Booth home, where you have the whole front of the house is a turret. The whole thing. And again, talk about moving away from symmetry. You have two doors, one over here and one over there on that side, from the side. So you don't have a front entry at all. You know, that compared to the box. And you can see things have really changed. You're moving doors around. This one will have a door on one side for the family. They can come in and go directly into the dining room or kitchen. And then you have a door on the other side, which is simply into the parlor. So when people come, you have a room for them to enter. It's always kept clean. This is the one where in the novels you see mother running through the house, pulling the sheets off all the furniture because somebody's walking up the driveway or up the steps. But this is Queen Anne in some sense at her best in Mount Vernon. Different textures here, and this incredible porch across the whole front of the house. Now this one, this of course is another great treasure in our community. Abby Swanson's home with the restored porch. This is historic because of its ownership as well. Captain Kepler, who is a very influential gentleman in the shaping of this town and a member of the Iowa legislature, built this house, or had this house built. But look at the Palladian windows. That is the two windows on the side and a window with an arch. There's a Palladian window. The texture here is on the gable end is fish scale, and if you look through this property, when you see it and your eye goes from the top to the bottom or the bottom to the top, go over on this side and you'll find a bay that's almost a turret. This is Queen Anne. Again, when you see all the textures, different shapes of windows, you're into this Victorian or Queen Anne period, which, as I say, we've got buckets of it. Here's another one that we argue about, but I still think it's Queen Anne, again, because of the textures. Up in the gables, you've got fish scaling. Then the way that this gable is set into the roof, Tim Morrissey's place, it's the same technique. There's several of these around. They look like they're out of the same pattern. They're just decorated a little differently. The large front porch, again, with the entry is not in the center, and a small bay, but it has the elements of Queen Anne without the turret. And in some sense, this is the Great Queen Anne. This is the Bowman Hall as it was originally built, with the great, beautiful porch, east-like porch. This is by the same architect that did the chapel. He also did Root House. But here again, you see an amazing array of brickwork. The frieze along underneath the, come on, worthless. Okay, well, I'm running out of time anyway. Okay, I think Ed had that set. Then we get to what some of us would call the American Foursquare. We're talking here at the turn of the century now, right around 1900, where houses become, in some sense, pretty much square. And it's called a sort of four-square style. It's clearly not Victorian in the sense that we don't have all the gingerbread, we don't have all kinds of exterior decoration. It's very restrained, and it's quite symmetrical, restrained in terms of decoration. And clearly, we have a number of these. This is the Riga house on North 2nd Street. A little bay window on both floors, front porch, very square. Some elements of decoration, but very restrained. Again, this one is quite unusual in that it has brackets up underneath the overhang. A couple more of those rather quickly. This is turn of the century to 1920. Here's one of a really wonderful one up on the hill. Collin House, next to the President's house. You know, look how balanced, how square this is, just except for this beautiful porch on the side. It's just a basic square house. But again, the Palladian windows on either side, beautiful sense of entry in the middle, and then your little attic windows at the top with some degree of elegance. But it's essentially four square, and then you're trying to decorate. Okay. This is another one. This is right here on First Street, across the street from the middle school. This was served, people who owned this home used it as a tourist home during the era of the Lincoln Highways. You could stop there overnight. It was an early form of bed and breakfast. But look at the fish scaling now on the first floor. It's not just confined up into the gable or the end of the house. Now it's the whole curtain of the house is in fish scale. And that, again, is a kind of element that we're combining some of the decoration of the high Victorian with a much more simplified frame. And then we get the what some people will call the cottage, but really is the arts and crafts bungalow period. And we have a number of these in Mount Vernon. This is Bob Sutherland. But this is a classic example of the bungalow. Arts and crafts. Back to a kind of almost cabin environment, away from the high Victorian styles. This is a homey building. Everything about it is meant to be warm. It uses a lot of interior. The furnishings in this are going to be sickly. They're going to be natural wood. They're going to have a crafted look, not a manufactured look. And here we have fish scaling, again, textures on the entire house, all the way through it. Long sloping roofs with overhang, brackets, and then always some form of a porch, but not necessarily, and well, never across the whole front of the house and wrapping around, as we saw on the Foursquare, which was an ideal house for that. Here's another one, and this is the stucco. I point this out in part because it gives me a chance to talk about the bungalow and stucco. Stucco was going to be the great miracle curtain for your house. What could be better than stone in an Iowa winter? I mean, you got this cement out here that's going to keep the cold out. It's going to keep the heat out. And in a lot of ways it does. But these homes require a lot of care. We're getting into mortar and stucco, but they can be repaired. But again, we need to be very careful about dealing with stucco. We have about 5 stucco homes in town. We really don't have all that many, especially with the popularity of the material and of the style. But this is, again, the bungalow's long sloping roof, but in its organization, clearly kind of a story and a half, not... and then this, we get into the 1920s, and this, where Americans and Iowans, following the trend, begin to copy European styles. This is the Mediterranean house, someplace Italian, southern France, large terracotta roof, heavy roof lines, little, just a tiny hint of a bay, and it's made out of metal, dark bricks. This is the sunroom, enclosed sunroom, and this is the first house in town to have a garage built into the house. And you begin to see it here. But that's stucco. So we've got brick and terracotta and stucco. And then we have these lovely wood entry pieces, and notice the gable cut into the roof here. Here's a picture, of the entry. A kind of hint of a porch, but here's a rounded frame for this door. It's a round. It's not just painted that way. This is the bungalow period, and this is where Ellen Duvall's house, the stone one, as I pointed out, is also architect home, and it's really an English cottage-style revival out of stone. And in Cedar Rapids, we've got even mission style. Out of this period in the 20s and into the early 30s. But remember, by mid-1920s, Iowa's in trouble. Way ahead economically, way ahead of the trouble. Is in trouble economically, way ahead of the crash of '29. Farm prices started going down in 1920. Land values dropped, and by 25, 26, there's a lot of bank foreclosures in Iowa. Not a good time to be building. We have very little building in Mount Vernon from these two homes. The Duvall and the Krall home are some of the very, very few homes from the 20s. It's going to be the 1950s, late 40s and early 50s, before the boom takes off again. Well, that's it. Just a couple comments, and then I'm out of here and late. As you look at the elements of shape, we've talked about that. We've talked about textures, brick, double wall or curtain, wood. You have wood framing, siding, details. With stone, and we have very few stone houses, you either have a smooth limestone or an irregular limestone. You want the Methodist church in town uses a lot of the rough cut limestone. You go look across the street, and all around the doors of the Presbyterian church you have this sort of polished, flat, beautiful flat cut limestone. So it comes in different textures. And then houses always have to deal with light, and that's the question of openings. I would love to spend some time with you, especially those of you that have some of the Victorian Queen Anne and Foursquare houses. Most of these houses were designed in an era before electricity. You've got to remember that when you're working on the insides of those homes. They're designed to maximize natural light, and the designers are exceedingly clever. They know how to move light into a dark hall that's in the middle of the house. They're going to do it by a window at one end, or they're going to do it by transom, glass that lets the light from the inside into the hall. They're very clever. This is a generation that, at 9 o'clock everybody was in bed and you were out there with lamps. But they did know how to live with the sun. And I find a number of people that I've talked to about their Victorian homes wanting to overpower them. We got all this candle power now, we call it. I mean, it's ridiculous, not candle power, but that's what we call it. And people want to put lights all over the place. Soften those lights in those homes. Let the natural light do it. Create an ambiance. Well, anyway, that's another lecture. Well, I've already given two. All right. I'm going to be here all day, and I'll be talking this afternoon about windows, and be happy to visit with any of you. Thank you very much. Houses are organic, and this is where I depart from some of my preservation friends. I mean, houses are organic, and they tell a story. And every once in a while I see a place where I say, that bay window does not belong on that style. But it's been there a long time. And in some sense that needs to be respected. But I have one place that I think is, two places that I think are post-Civil War. But I'm really not that sure. We've got 35 of these homes that should be in a district. And my project in the next year is to write to all 35 owners and say, can we get together and can you help us put this district together? Can you do some work with your abstract or whatever to help us pull this together? But as I say, after the Civil War, when the bridge connects Chicago and we start to see high temperature brick and tile being manufactured, that's really the end of the soft brick period and the double wall building.
So it was primarily because of the soft brick they used it, or was it just
It's only soft brick in the sense that that the kilns that they had didn't develop the highest temperatures that later that manufactured brick does. I mean, these are manufactured, but it's local clay, it's local sand, so you have to take that into account. Nobody has, you know, they know what good clay is, but they can't get the temperatures, so the brick tends to be softer. But you can almost tell them in Mount Vernon. There's a kind of orange character to them. Look at Old Sem and get that color in your head, and then start walking around town, and you'll see that that's all that same clay pit. Yes.
In that double brick construction, are the exterior walls as well as the interior walls virtually all hollow with an airspace?
Well, the hollow space is between the outside wall and the inside wall.
Yes.
Okay. So you have inside brick walls who are covered with plaster.
Yes.
The plaster is applied right to the brick.
Yes.
Okay.
And the exterior wall of the house, it has a hollow space that are not solid.
You've got an exterior wall.
The exterior wall, the photograph you showed
Right.
an airspace
Right.
between the two sides of the brick on
Right.
the interior wall. That's also the case with the outside wall
No,
of the
no.
house.
What you saw there is okay, yes, I'm sorry. I got it now. I was showing you an inside wall, but that is the same as the outside wall. It's the same way. The airspace is there. Yeah.
Is it to use that airspace as a way to run electrical service to modernize it?
Anybody here had experience with that?
I tried to get cable TV, not cable TV, yeah, it was cable TV. And the guy said he couldn't get through the wall. You can't have cable. I said, well, can't you run it down somewhere? And he said, well, we're not to do that. So consequently, we have cable in one small corner of our home, but we can't get it in the others without going through both courses of brick. And then he tried to go to the basement wall, which is a stone basement wall.
Oh, yeah.
And to
Stone
get that,
brick.
he couldn't get
Yeah.
in there at all. And hanging anything in a house with this kind of wall is impossible.
Hanging?
Well, have you ever tried to hang a large picture?
Oh, I see, yeah. Right.
It's hopeless.
Yeah.
It's an all-day project to get something up there to hang. But I love it.
The space is there, and there are people who've run electricity and people who bought these old brick homes and then, after they bought them, tried to put in an outlet and found out they were double brick walls. I'm warning you that that's what they are, and but every 7 rows, you're going to have a row of brick that you're going to have to go through if you're running that wire. So if some contractors will be here this afternoon, but you can often run around the house pretty well if you can get in between those between those tie areas. But going up and down is where you've got the problem. You can't get in there to get through that tie layer of brick. Yeah.
They put in a big window a couple of years ago. When this house was built, the contractor thought it might be 1850s.
Yeah.
Did they build it in brick and then put the clapboard right on it, or was it exposed?
You can put clapboard over a brick structure, and in Mount Vernon I need to get out of here to give her a chance. But This afternoon we're going to talk about mortar and brick stuff, and there are, I just want to say one thing about my experience in Mount Vernon, and that is people who've had these old brick homes have done a remarkable job trying to save them. Now, we know a lot more about how to save those buildings now than they did 25 and 30 years ago. And I'm looking at the history of the college and the number of times it sandblasted some of these soft brick buildings. It was a mistake. It was a mistake, but it was what you did. Nobody knew any different. And, same thing is true of mortar and other kinds of things. But people have painted the brick, trying to keep it from, to seal it. Well, we need to talk about that, because the problem is not the brick, the problem is the mortar. And we'll get to that today. But I really appreciate your questions, but I'm pressed here. Can we pick you up later? Thanks.